Hi everyone, Stepan here. I'm going to show you my round 5 game from the Dubrovnik Advent Open, where I played a strong international master called Danko Plenkovic in the King's Indian, which is an opening he always plays. And as you may know, I've been playing the Semi Averbach against it. So for this game, I was trying to do something different. Uh, well, you're going to see what happened. Before we get into the game, I'm sure you've heard me mention Nocti before. After having finished the World Championship promotion, we now have a Christmas or holiday promotion. If you would like to check it out, we are offering, or I'm offering, free lessons, one-on-one lesson with me to anyone who signs up and goes premium on Nocti. If you do that, use the code HP lesson. You can find it in the description. You get Nocti 64% off for the first 2 months. And contact Samuel, the creator of Nocti, using this email, and you will get a free lesson with me. It will be an introductory lesson, or I'm going to try to do my best to make it useful for you. If you would like to do that, again, check out Nocti. Now let's go to the game. Thank you.
Okay, so I knew what was gonna be played most likely. I knew that my opponent's gonna try to go for the King's Indian. I was 90% sure. So my prep was as follows. I didn't want to play what I've been playing so far. So I didn't want to play the Semi Averbach against my opponent. He was going to be prepared. So instead, I started preparing something that two Croatian players have played against International Master Plenkovic. One of the variations, I don't really know what to call it, is the casual variation, in my opinion, where you go knight f3, and after castles, you go h3. And this is slightly weird because in the normal Makogonov variation, where you start with h3, your idea is to go knight e2, g4, knight g3. And when the knight is on f3, the ideas are different. So this was my first idea. And then my second idea is what I ended up playing, the Makogonov with h3, which, as you can see here, is a fairly popular variation, about 6,000 games played in total. And once again, the idea is knight g2, g4, knight g3, and you have a very solid position. You're supporting e4. You have overextended, but you have excellent control over f5 with your knight on g3 and the two pawns. And I have to say my prep wasn't good enough because the only move I was ever looking at is castles here. And I figured, well, black's gonna castle anyway, so this is the line that we were gonna play. e5, d5, and then knight a6, g4, and so on and so on. And then in the game, my opponent very, very quickly played knight b to d7. And the thing with the King's Indian is if black doesn't castle, then your plans, your aggressive plans, don't really make that much sense. Not that the Makogonov is an aggressive opening. It's not like the Semi Averbach where you start a kingside pawn storm, but it's still very committal. So I was reluctant to play g4 or anything else for that matter. So I decided just to develop and wait for my opponent to commit. So I played bishop e3. And of course, if my opponent castles, we just go into the same line. Okay, e5, d5, and knight c5. And now I'm sort of in trouble because I have to choose between two moves that don't allow me to go for the Makogonov setup. And I obviously have no experience in this line. I've never played it before. So I ended up spending about 20 minutes here. Once again, this is a 60 plus 30 game. It's not a regular tournament game where you have 90 minutes to think. And there are two moves. There's f3 and there's queen c2. So here's the issue with queen c2. First of all, black wishes to exchange this bishop for this bishop, because this is black's bad bishop. And there is a game Filip Cvitkovic played as white against my opponent, and International Master Plenkovic played bishop f6, wanted to play bishop g5, but Filip prevented it by playing g5 at the correct moment. He had his queen on d2. So if I go queen c2, the eventual trade that is going to happen, because black plays knight f to d7 and bishop f6 and bishop g5, I'm not going to have enough control over the g5 square. So my opponent's going to have bishop g5, exchanging my best piece for their worst piece. So that's the downside with queen c2. Of course, queen c2 is the comfortable way to defend the pawn, because f3, the only... I should also mention that knight sacrifices don't work because the king is still on e8. So if knight takes, bishop f5, not only do I have multiple ways to defend the knight, but I can also just take on f6 with check and I'm up a piece. So that's queen c2, which is what I ended up playing. If I go f3, which is a move I would like to play because it's a part of my setup, and now given time, let's say black castles, I go g4, I go knight g2, knight g3, I have the Makogonov setup. But on f3, what if black plays knight h5 and looks at the f4 square, at the g3 square, there's queen h4. I don't really want to go g4 here, that would be absurd, because g4, knight f4, and if I take, this bishop is a monster. So when I was spending my 20 minutes considering this, my best idea was knight g2. But then, of course, f5 comes, and I have no idea what's going on here. So I was going to take takes, and queen c2, preparing to castle. Queenside, maybe. But this allows queen h4 check, and after bishop f2, I don't think the pawn on c4 can be taken, because if queen c4, I go knight d4, and I have a huge initiative. Once again, I have not used an engine. We're going to see that at the end of the game. I don't think the pawn can be taken. But even a normal move like queen g5, this seems very uncomfortable. What do I do? e4 is always a move. f4 is always a move, giving this bishop the f5 square. If f4 comes, then g3 is a problem square. Maybe knight f4 is a move. This just seemed very ugly. I didn't want to go for this. So I ended up playing queen c2. But now again, I'm not going to have the same setup I wanted to play. a5, g4. Okay, makes sense. Knight f to d7. And now I played knight g2, which is, in hindsight, a big strategic inaccuracy. So I was blinded by what I knew about this. And I wanted to, since I had this pawn structure with h3, g4, I wanted to get my knight to g3 because that makes sense. But the problem with my idea, knight g2, well, my idea, the Makogonov idea, is that now bishop f6 works. So if black had castled, okay, let's imagine black throws in castles, and I go queen d2. We have now transposed to the normal standard lines, where after bishop f6, I have g5. Okay, in the game position, after I'd played bishop knight g2 e2, bishop f6, I don't have g5. And I ended up playing queen d2, which I think is a dreadful move, because there is h6. I was hoping for some tricks with h4, and I think they did work, which I found in the analysis, but I was too afraid to play for that during the game. So after queen d2, which is what I played, my opponent played h6, and I played knight g3. Now, instead of knight g2, to simply prevent this idea, I should have played knight f3. And when I was analyzing this game, I put knight f3 on the board, and I couldn't find a single downside. What's the problem? Oh, sorry. Sorry, my dog is upset because someone entered the building. My dog is slightly insane. Okay, so on knight f3, there's simply no bishop f6, bishop g5. It's as simple as that. And my knight is not ideally placed, but that's fine. In any case, I played knight g2, a mistake. Bishop f6, queen d2, h6, preventing g5. And after the game, my opponent told me, well, black is fine there, you allowed me to exchange bishops, and I knew that, but there was nothing I could have done. So I basically lost the tempo on queen c2, because my opponent avoided castling. So I'm not really sure what I should have done. Is the setup with knight f3 just an alternative to the standard setup you have to go for if black delays castling? Maybe. We will see. knight g3, bishop g5. And here I played b3, and I was thinking, okay, so I'm preventing a4, I'm preventing f5. What does my opponent do? And that's relatively true. My opponent played knight b6, and I played bishop e2. He played bishop d7, and there isn't much going on. I would say that this is just an equal position where it's really not easy to do anything. And the idea I should have gone for, I think, which I have considered during the game, but I ended up never playing it, is h4, trading pawns. Because if my opponent takes on e3, then okay, I've made some progress, my pawn is on h4, that's fine, h6 is going to be constantly weak. If bishop h4, then I can just play bishop takes h6. And g5 never traps my bishop, because I can just take. And the rook's hanging in the end, takes. And that's it. If queen takes, bishop takes, rook takes, and I win 2 rooks, actually. So h4 was an aggressive way forward, but I was too afraid to change the nature of the position, so I played rook b1. And rook b1 is a waiting move. I basically wanted to see what my opponent was going to do. And I didn't really know what black's plans should be. Should black play for f5, and if so, how? a4 will never work. The pieces on the queen side are sort of, well, these two knights look good, but they don't really do much. Black can exchange the bishop, but okay, what next? So I wanted to see what my opponent was going to do. And I'm holding everything together. He played queen e7, which is a waiting move. And again, I should have gone h4. The same tactic worked. And at this point I had definitely under 20 minutes, but I don't remember how much time exactly. And I just wanted to make a quick waiting move and see how black was going to commit. If they castle queenside, then okay, a3, b4, I advance. If they castle kingside, then definitely h4. If they don't, then what next? And I ended up playing a waiting move that, in my opinion, was the losing move. And there are waiting moves here. I can literally play rook g1 and get away with it, or rook h2, or I don't know, knight d1, knight c3, knight d1, knight c3. I played bishop d1, and as soon as I played it, I wanted to resign. So my opponent is obviously 2350, an international master, a very, very strong player, and they are going to use this blunder to punish me, and I'm going to be worse. Now, why is bishop d1 such a big blunder? Well, it allows a4. The entire idea behind b3 in the King's Indian, let's say I play a normal move. If they go a4, since my pawn is on b3, I can now play b4 in one move without allowing en passant. And that not only keeps the position closed, but it also chases the knight away from c5. So the knight goes to a6, I go a3, this pawn is weak, the c5 square is secure, I've made some progress, I can look forward to playing c5 in the future. This is a positionally very, very dominant position for white, which is why I played b3. And when I played bishop d1, of course my opponent plays a4. Now I don't have b4, because c4 is hanging with tempo on the queen. And this bishop, and it's, if I go b4, I can resign, obviously, so I didn't go b4. I should have gone bishop c2, I think, because that keeps an eye on the b3 pawn. That was probably slightly better than what I did. Instead, I just lost another full tempo, brought my bishop back to e2, and accepted the fact that the a5 is going to, the a file is going to open. Okay, my opponent took on b3. And I have to be worse here, I just don't know how much. There was an alternative to taking on b3, which I found during analysis, which is bishop takes, queen takes, a takes, and rook a3, dragging my queen away so that I don't have queen to c2, and I'm forced to play b4, and there is knight a4. And I was terrified of this position. I thought that this could be resignable already. I mean, what do I do? It seems very ugly, but what my opponent did is probably good enough. AB, rook a3, and now I can take on g5, queen g5, and I can go queen c2, at least defending my b pawn. Okay, my opponent castled here. And of course I was unhappy with my position. I didn't really know what to do. I had two candidate moves, b4 or castles kingside. I couldn't decide what was better. If I go b4, then knight a4 and probably knight d1, just not losing a piece, because if I exchange, then the other knight comes in and rook c3 is hanging. Now obviously this isn't a good position, but maybe I can get to play knight e3 and maybe play for c5 later on. Maybe. I couldn't find a way to harass this rook. So that was one candidate. I ended up castling because I saw that my opponent was going to play h5, f5 and keep moving forward, but there were so many problems with white's king safety that I couldn't make any variation work with my king on e1. Okay, h5. At this point I had, I want to say, less than 10 minutes. You can check. There is, this was played on a live board, so you can find, if you go to the chess results page, you can see in the description, just you can see the move times. Okay, I have to play f3. I mean, I have to defend my pawn. And since I've weakened the e3 square, I was reluctant to play f3 because it weakens the e3 square, but I couldn't make knight b3 work. So knight b3, rook b3, rook b3, queen b3, queen e3 check. And okay, let's say king g2, and now knight a4. And I don't have rook c1 because my rook is hanging. There's no other way to defend, so I'm gonna give the piece back. So yeah, it actually does work. What am I talking about? This would have been even more winning. I don't know why I stopped here. Yeah, okay, this is busted probably. Maybe I can take on b7, but I doubt it. We will check with the engine. In any case, my opponent surprised me here and played f5. And suddenly, I'm back in the game. Why? Because I take ef, and after gf, I play knight takes h5. And my opponent was really surprised when he saw knight h5. I'm sure he missed it. And the attack is gone. I mean, I'm just up a pawn. I'm not going to stay up a pawn, most likely, but my king is relatively safe. And if my opponent doesn't do anything, well, then b4 is coming, and maybe I can, I don't know, king g2, solidify, and so on. So he played f4, which makes sense because it traps the knight and maybe prepares bishop e8 and takes on h5. So this diagonal is an issue, obviously, and if the bishop comes to g6, I could be in trouble, so I played bishop d3. And I don't really mind exchanging this bishop for this knight, because if that happens, then I'll have knight e4 in the end at some point, and I will block the light squares. So on bishop d3, my opponent played bishop e8, which is understandable. And here, I did play king f2. During analysis, I found h4, but also h4 here. Instead of bishop d3, I had h4. And if this is taken, it's just mate. I didn't even see this during the game. So if queen h4, I go queen g6, queen g7, mate. When my bishop's on d3, it's not mate, but it's still interesting. So if I go h4 and takes, then bishop h7, king f7, bishop g6, king e7, bishop takes, king takes, and knight b5 was my analysis, threatening knight c7 and an infiltration with the queen. And this seemed better for white. I mean, I wouldn't say white's winning, but maybe white is winning. I don't really know how black should defend the c7 pawn. And if the c7 pawn falls, then the knight comes to e6 eventually. So this would have been great. Instead, I played king f2. I was afraid of the checks, and I wanted to get my rooks to the open files if my opponent ever takes. And yeah, here my opponent did take on h5. I was expecting knight takes d3, queen takes d3, queen h4 check, and after king e2, queen takes h3. But it didn't seem scary to me. Maybe it is scary. I was gonna go rook f2, but maybe there's something better. I don't know. This didn't seem scary. Okay, so he played bishop h5. I took, of course, queen g3 check, and king e2. And I was happy here. I mean, I have the open g file. My opponent has to do something now. I have this great battery on the light squares, and we are fighting for the e4 square. In fact, my biggest concern here was whether I'm going to be able to prevent e4 in the long run, and whether b3 was going to fall. If b3 doesn't fall and e4 doesn't happen, I couldn't see what my opponent could do. So he played king h8. And I had 2 minutes on the clock here, something like that. My opponent had loads of time, maybe 20 minutes. And I played bishop f5 and offered the draw. I thought I was better here. I would have never offered the draw against a very strong opponent if I thought I was worse. That's, in my opinion, impolite. Or if it was equal. I just figured white has to be better here. And my opponent thought for a while, ended up declining the draw. He told me after the game, I declined 2 draws this tournament and ended up losing the games. I think that's what he said. I was hoping it wouldn't happen again. That's what he said. So he played queen g5. And now I had a choice to make. Do I fight against e4, or do I just solidify my pawns on the king side with bishop g4? I'm sure bishop g4 is better now. Now I think so, because it's very hard to break through. I'm not going to give you variations because there are 10 candidate moves for black here, but this would have been better. Instead, I played bishop e4, and I was hoping black was going to take. Black played rook g8. Now, of course, if I go rook g1, then my opponent gives up the queen for 2 rooks and probably is very close to winning because my king is so unsafe. So I played bishop g6. And this is another reason why I kept the bishop on e4. I wanted to break this communication between the queen and rook. Okay, c6, which makes sense. I mean, you want to break down the structure. My opponent isn't going to beat me unless these pawns start moving. And here I played a move which I blame on time trouble. I just played h4. I thought, oh, it's a good idea to give up this pawn, clear the h file. Maybe that gives me more counterplay. That's stupid. I just gave up a pawn. I still have a pawn on h5. My opponent's never going to sack on g6. So this is just not only giving up a pawn, but it's a clear waste of tempo. There's absolutely no reason to do that. Instead, of course, I should have gone rook g1, which is the reason I went bishop g6 in the first place, and rook g4. And then the other rook comes to g1, and I have some play. Instead, I went h4, my opponent took. I went rook f2, which makes no sense. Again, I should have gone rook g1. But I was afraid of queen h2 check. cd5, I have to take with the pawn because I need something to control e4, queen f6. And now I think after my next move, I'm in trouble. I played rook b2. And again, I don't really know why. When I'm in time trouble, I try to make moves that don't hang anything, and I try to make moves that solidify my position. Rook b2 seemed like a safe move, because now I may be able to move my queen to d1. My idea was queen d1, queen g1, or queen d1, queen h1. But my rook is just offside. I needed my rooks on the g file. My opponent played rook c8, and I played bishop f5. Well, I don't really know what to suggest for black here. The rook is in trouble. If the rook comes to c7, then I just win with knight b5. Because it's a fork. So after bishop f5, my opponent went back to f8. I played bishop g6 because my bishop was hanging. e4. And now, if you want, you can pause the video and figure out what you would take with. So there are 2 obvious candidate moves here. You never really want to take with the f-pawn because it gives black a passed pawn. So you either take with the bishop or with the knight. One move, I'm sure, is completely losing. And one move I'm sure is better for white after having spent an hour on this position alone, again without the engine. I took with the bishop, which is the losing move. After bishop takes, I think black has to have a -4, -5 advantage. It's just everything works for black after bishop takes. I should have taken with the knight. The reason I should have taken with the knight is because I force a trade of knights, which prevents rook c8, solidifies my position, and defends d5 after bishop takes, and gets rid of black's best piece, making this knight, well, not useless, but it's gonna need to waste some time to get to e5 or c5. And more importantly, once again, the rook doesn't come to c8. So after knight e4, bishop e4, it's very hard to argue that black has any sort of pressure here. Unless I move my b-pawn for some reason and hang rook e3 check with something ugly. But I'm not going to move my b-pawn because it restricts the knight and it restricts the rook. So at some point, my opponent would have had to move this rook away, which may have given me time for something like rook g2 and queen c7. And with this bishop on e4 being superior to the knight on b6, I think white's the one playing for a win here. Now, with a minute or two on the clock, anything could have happened, but I'm just saying, I would argue that this is better for white. Now I took with the bishop, and why is this so bad? It's bad because it helps activate the rook. Black doesn't need to take because the queen isn't hanging. So black just went rook c8. And now what do I do? I don't really have time for, I don't know. Well, I don't even know what my candidate moves were. Maybe I have time for bishop f5 again, but I doubt it. The knight's hanging. Everything is loose. Now, obviously, when my opponent played e4, it was a pawn sacrifice to open up the queen. And I just thought that everything's hanging here, and I think it is. So I played queen d2, getting away from the tempi with knight c4, down the c file with knight discoveries, and that of course hangs the game. Knight takes b3. I don't know. I will turn on the engine to see what the best move is after I've gone over the game. But after queen d2, I just played, because I had no time on the clock, I kept making almost instant moves, and I knew I was losing. So I have to give up an exchange. If I don't, I lose my knight on c3. Takes. I went knight d1, covering e3, covering b2, saving the knight, knight c4. All of my opponent's pieces are coming in, and it's hopeless. Queen a2, rook a3, queen c2, queen a8, queen a1, sorry, and I tried to hold on to all the squares. I went queen b2 check here, hoping for a queen trade that would have given me some drawing chances, because my bishop is decent. It's a decent piece, even though I'm down the exchange. But my opponent elegantly declines, and of course I cannot take on a1 because I lose my knight eventually. So I played rook d2. Knight takes, and this is the last final combination. Of course, if I take with the rook, my opponent takes the queen, so I have to take rook a1. I have to take the knight, and rook e3 was the final precise move. My opponent played king g7, and I resigned. It happens when you're in time trouble. You just keep making moves, and once the position calms down and you see, oh, okay, it's hopeless, then you resign. This is, of course, completely hopeless. There's nothing I can do. It's a very elementary endgame with my king cut off from the f-pawn. Therefore, my bishop is stuck. So when my opponent plays king h6, they'll have 2 passed pawns, and I'll have 0. So let's turn on the engine. And let's turn on the book. So, which is, I haven't done that either. So h3, engine and book. So here, okay, on knight bd7 instead of castles, bishop e3 is correct. e5, d5, knight c5 is fine. Okay, both queen c2 and f3 are playable, it seems, but queen c2 is better. I can also go bishop d3, which I haven't considered, or queen b1, which I also haven't considered. So queen c2 is the best move. Fine. a5, okay. g4, makes sense. Knight fd7. And yeah, knight f3, come on. I should have gone knight f3 because it just prevents my opponent's idea of going bishop f6, bishop g5. Okay, I played knight e2, bishop f6. Queen d2 is out there. It's the second best move. Can you guys see all the evaluations? Yes. So queen d2 is the second best move. Knight g3 is the best move. I mean, knight g3 makes sense because if the bishops are going to get traded off... Okay, now it plays queen d2. Well, it's just transposing. So I played queen d2. Ah, yeah, and my opponent played h6. Now I played knight g3. It's still just equal. Okay, so black has equalized. And if the engine says equal in the King's Indian, that means white has made a serious mistake. Okay, bishop g5, h4, as stated before, was on my radar, but I never played it. b3 is fine, still equal. Knight b6, bishop e2 is fine, bishop d7, h4, once again, we looked at this. Rook b1, still equal. Queen e7, still equal. h4, okay, was the best move, makes sense. Knight d1 was the waiting move I'd recommended, but I played bishop d1, hanging a4. Yeah, okay, it's only minus 0.4. Well, I'm surprised to see this. I figured black would be better here. But this is, okay, minus 0.6. It's still close to equal. And after a... Well, okay, wait. a4 isn't the best move? Takes, takes. h5. This is strange. Why would this be better than a4? Okay, f3. Queen h4, knight e2. This is, I mean, this isn't a human way to play. I don't get this. Why would you castle queenside? I think a4 is fine, what my opponent did. And yeah, I should have gone bishop c2. I went bishop e2. Yeah, now it's... now it's busted. Because I'll have a hard time holding on to b3. Wait, taking is a mistake. Why? Okay, I looked at this. Takes, queen takes, AB, AB, rook a3. Because now my queen doesn't have c2, and I have to play b4. I was looking at knight a4, yeah. Oh, but now I do have rook c1, because the queen isn't on g5. Okay, okay. I'm still worse, but I'm not hanging material. Yeah, this would have been better. Instead, ab3, ab3. Rook a3 is a mistake. I should have taken on g5, which I did. Queen c2 is fine. This is close to equal. That's surprising. King f1, rook g1, or b4. Okay, b4 I did look at, but I castled. Oh no, -1. Okay, h5 happened. f3 happened. Knight b3 should have been played. We looked at that variation, but my opponent played f5. And wait, even though I win the pawn, it's equal? Okay. Okay, after f4, white is better. And h4, yes. h4 because it's mate in 2. And I could have gained some space. I didn't consider this at all during the game. Okay, I went bishop d3, which is okay. Once again, h4, we looked at that. King f2 -2? No, 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 no. Why? Why? Okay, we looked at knight d3. Queen d3. What's the point? Queen h4 check. King e2, queen h3. I said this doesn't look scary. And I would have gone rook f2. It's -0.5. Oh, the knight's coming to c5. Or even to... Oh, okay. Yeah, this isn't good. It doesn't seem crushing for black. But when the engine starts explaining, it starts getting scary. Okay, my opponent took on h5 instead, which is close to equal. Queen g3 check, king e2, king h8. Okay, I played bishop f5. This is the point where I offered the draw and he declined. Okay, it's just equal. Yeah, I should have gone bishop g4 makes sense. Instead I went bishop e4. Wait, queen g2 check? Again, the same line, just taking the pawn. Okay. Okay, bishop e4. Bishop g6 equal. c6, white is better. Yeah, I should have gone rook g1. I know I should have gone rook g1. Why did I play h4? Why? Not only does it lose a pawn, but it's a full waste of tempo. Queen f5 I didn't even consider. Hanging my b-pawn. Yeah, now I started making bad moves. I should have gone rook g2, rook g1. Instead rook b2. Yeah. Rook c8. Bishop f5 is a blunder. Oh, it does make sense. You go knight cd7 and then you're threatening e4. Boo. Okay. Bishop g6, holding on. Yeah, knight e4. Wait, white isn't better after knight e4? I figured white would be better here. Okay. Wrong evaluation, it's equal. But on bishop e4, I'm sure black is winning. Oh, yes. Knight c4 immediately. Yeah, that just works. Oh, that's crushing. Because the knight's coming to e3. Oh my god. Oof. Okay, he missed that. He played rook c8, which is fine. And if bishop f5, still, and my knight is attacked, yeah. I went queen d2, which is just takes on b3. Yeah, I don't think we have to look at any more of this. This I knew was busted, and my opponent knew as well. We were both just playing instantly. Okay, yeah. And this final nice combination. Okay, and here I resigned. So not a good game. I mean, it felt uncomfortable. I made a mistake of trying to play waiting moves to see if my opponent's going to commit instead of doing something active. I'm not going to make that mistake again. Okay, so this was my round 5 game. Thank you for watching. Once again, check out Nocti in the description below. And I hope to see you for a lesson. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye.